We saw Donald Trump's nuclear submarine threat that was followed by Russia announcing Oreshniks in serial production, as well as the fact that Russia's foreign ministry has said that their own restrictions on intermediate range missiles has been let go of because of US moves in particular, as well as NATO moves over the last several months to years. So talk about these escalations in this context as you've been following what's been going on in this conflict.
I think this nuclear threat, so-called, of the two subs being, if you like, nuclear or higher class submarines, being, as Trump said, positioned close to Russia, misunderstands and miscasts the whole issue, and therefore the Russians, I don't think, will take this very seriously. These Ohio class submarines, essentially nuclear-equipped, nuclear-capable submarines, are second strike weapons. That is to say, after Russia putatively had made a first strike on America, the whole point of these submarines, which are deployed all the time, always, there are already two there. It's not as if he sent any purpose in sending any more. They lie quietly on the ocean floor. Quietly, because any noise, any engine start will be detected by the Russians, who have acoustics across the whole area, and they have killer subs who will follow these. So to suggest you're going to send them out in the open on the seas in Kellogg, the supposed advisor to Trump was sort of whispering, well, we'll send the whole fleet and they can cruise up and down. I mean, the whole point is that they are not flaunted. And no one of the Russians don't know where they are. That is the whole point of a second strike force, that it lies quietly, doing nothing on the ocean floor for a period, maybe 2 months or whatever it is, and then they're relieved by another two submarines. And the point of this is really just to be there in case of a Russian first strike. That's all, not to threaten Russia. And so I think all of the Russians who know a little bit about, nuclear geopolitics will understand that both Kellogg and Trump, what they were saying was so ridiculous. Must have had the Pentagon pulling their hair out, saying, oh yes, what, you don't want us to send our whole second strike capability out in the open so the Russians can know exactly where everything is. Come on, that is the opposite of what we would do. So I don't think they would have taken this very, very seriously. I think what it has done is given a peg to Putin to go back to a topic he's been on for a long time. It's been on his agenda a long time, and this has been a peg to really say, okay, well, you have been placing intermediate and short-range missiles into Europe. Yes, the INF treaty is out of, if you like, it's no longer valid at the moment, but we have been unofficially observing it and keeping to it. But now we're dropping that. We are going to actually have to respond to this by our own positioning of short and intermediate range missiles. And at the same time, no coincidence, I suspect, he mentioned the Oreshnik missile, not nuclear, but a hypersonic missile that can reach anywhere in Europe, is now in serial production and is in the hands of the Russian army and therefore is available. And the great thing, if you like, is that it is much more effective than a nuclear weapon because of its accuracy. That's the game changer, is its accuracy. It can really pinpoint. It can pinpoint, MI6 headquarters or the Mossad headquarters and strike it precisely without collateral damage around it and destroy it utterly. So, and as I say, it's not nuclear and it can have multiple warheads. And now that's in serial production, mass production. And so they're changing it. And what Russia seems to be doing, two things. They've said, first of all, we need to be aware that in the Pacific and that area, Russia is also vulnerable too. But there we have our ally, North Korea. But in Europe, we are going to create a new security architecture. And, this is not something that is sort of a threat or a counter threat. It is a new architecture because this is what Russia has said from the outset. Putin made this clear in the speech on the 14th of June. What is necessary, the root cause of the problem in Ukraine is, if you like, the lack of a security architecture which safeguards Russia and Russian interests. And we need to get round to the architecture. Well, the West is just ignoring the treaty and going on its own way. So Russia has decided that it's going to do its own architecture. Now, will this prompt the West to do something that it sorely needs to do, which is to reinstate or renegotiate an intermediate and short-range nuclear missile treaty, or not? At the moment, there seems no interest in this at all. You may recall, just to underline it, that the United States has put missiles both in Poland and Romania. And during those talks, the first talks that did take place between Biden and Putin, then after the talks, Blinken made it clear to Lavrov that the Americans intended to put these missiles in Ukraine. Well, the flight time from Romania or from Poland is about 7 or 8 minutes to Moscow. If you put them in Ukraine, it's about 2 or 3 minutes. And this is just not acceptable. And this is why those talks at that time became completely broken.
The last time we spoke, Alastair, we talked about the US-backed Ukrainian attack on the strategic bombers. Now we're in a slightly different situation with as you said, the nuclear treaty that Russia never pulled out of. But there's also this development, I don't know if you saw, even as talks were happening, positive talks on both sides are saying they were positive between US and the US. There was a nuclear sniffer of the US sending. I'm not familiar actually even with this terminology, but the US Air Force sent one. It's a plane designed to track nuclear testing in the atmosphere, and it flew close to Russia's nuclear bases in the northwest of the country on the same day that Witkoff and Putin were meeting. And it took off from the RAF, Mildenhall, a UK base, and it traveled along the coast of West Norway. So I'm curious, what do you make of this? How do you see these kind of moves? And you wrote in your article that Russia is creating a new strategic architecture in the absence of international restrictions. How does this all relate? Because there is enthusiasm right now with these talks, but you've said that you've seen very little movement on the U.S. side. Is this another verification of that?
What I think this was about was that the Americans, just as the Russians, after what happened, after Trump's and Kellogg's rather silly statements about sort of putting all their subs out on the surface and sailing them around Russia, it followed, of course, as you rightly said, the spider's web attacks on their strategic nuclear capabilities, their key strategic nuclear capacities. This was if you like, the attack done from drones and insertions, pre-positioned weapons that attacked their strategic bomber. Of course, Russia will be looking very closely and saying, well, why were they doing that? Is there an attack intended? Is this what they are planning, to attack our strategic weapons? If so, are they planning some first strike capacity? You have to think about these things if you're president of Russia or any big state. So they undoubtedly are doing that. And then they've thought about it because, too, the second thing that has affected the Russian thinking about this, and it really shocked them what happened at those spiders' webs attack, because these were sort of inserted in advance and launched remotely at their nuclear bomber fleet. And they realize that they're very open to this, but more so because we've had this succession, a decapitation strike against Hezbollah, an attempted decapitation strike against the Houthis in the Yemen, and then an actual decapitation strike in Iran against the line commanders of Iran and their nuclear scientists. So this means that Russia has got to think very carefully about what is this new form of warfare that the United States is preparing and thinking about. So you have to put that as a context and then understand what is happening. Clearly, Russia is looking to see if there's any change in the alert status of Western forces after that statement, however silly they thought it to be by Trump, that they would be looking to see, is there a change in status? Are the West mobilizing? Is the West mobilizing in some way, preparing for action? And if they don't see that, then they will take it easy. But as I'm saying, I don't think that this INF proposal was directly connected with this statements about the submarines. It was something Putin has had up his sleeve for some time. I've actually, heard it for a long time. He's wanted to get back because the intermediate missiles that the West has been putting, and they are planning to put them into Germany next. I mean, this is, threatening existentially Russia. It can't just ignore it and just go on, observing treaties that are no longer in existence and pretending to be content about it. It has to react, and that's what it's doing. But it's not, if you like, a threatening act. This is a defensive act, essentially a new security architecture to make Russia safer.
The Russian Foreign Ministry was the one who came out with this statement, and they had a litany of examples, Germany being one of those. But you also mentioned the Asia Pacific too, and there was cited examples, for example, the Philippines. Could you talk about this and how it might influence the Russia-US posture now? How much do these nuclear questions factor into the relations between both sides amid this existential conflict for Russia in Ukraine?
Well, it means that I think that the position of North Korea becomes crucial because then Russia can, if you like, base missiles in North Korea, its ally there, that both cover the Asia Pacific region and even can stretch to the United States, even intermediate missiles, not the missiles covered, if you like, by the START treaties. So it's a really important change in architecture, and it's a change to a global position that Russia is taking on this issue. What is the effect of it? It is tying much more closely China, Russia, India, Iran, as amongst others, as the main elements. And they see now, and this is why the tariffs have become such a big issue, because they could see, the tariffs in India, which are now going to be at 50% for the time being. Trump says he may take them off, who knows? But with these tariffs, and they've said, and the US ambassador to NATO says there's going to be a lot more secondary sanctions on states that have relations with Russia. Come on. Well, this is real economic war. This is war against the BRICS. I mean, we call it tariffs. They're sanctions. They're it's a weaponizing of tariffs for geopolitical purposes. And so the BRICS are having to react. India has already started to react against it. And other states are going to come together. And BRICS and others have the ability to push back. I don't think the actual sanctions that I don't know if they've actually been announced on Russia, if there are sanctions announced in Russia. That wasn't clear to me when I looked this morning. But if they are, I mean, they will have very little effect on, China or India. China has been absolutely adamant on this. They've told America in no uncertain terms, I mean, bluntly for Chinese, who tend to be very courteous in their language and polite, but they've said, listen, when it comes to what we do in terms of buying our oil from either Russia or Iran, that's our business. It's not your business. We'll talk to you about direct trade relations between China and America, but stay out of these other areas. We are going to continue to have our energy security from Russia and Iran. So we're seeing a big sort of, if you like, pushback starting because it's now been made so clear with these tariffs that the United States is pursuing an economic war against the BRICS, and the BRICS have to find a way. It's no longer about economics or trade positions. This is a way that they have to fight for their autonomy and fight for their sovereignty, or else see it disappear and become, simply dependence on whether the United States says you can trade with this or that. And then they lose they lose then their sources of energy supply. Secure energy is no longer available. So it's a big issue, this. The sanctions, and the ones on India particularly, are just very symbolic of this economic war that is being waged on the BRICS states. And they now see very clearly, either they react or they lose their autonomy.
President of Brazil, Lula da Silva, said that he is going to, because Brazil itself, for example, in BRICS, doesn't really have power to negotiate with the United States, that he's going to be trying to organize BRICS states together to confront these tariffs. But Alastair, as you were talking, it brought me to Trump's initial reactions. He's been being slammed for these secondary tariffs, or we should call them sanctions, on India over Russia. And many in the Western media are saying, why are you singling out India versus China? This was his answer.
So let's see what happens over the next. You're going to see a lot more.
So this is a taste.
You're going to see a lot more. You're going to see so much secondary sanctions. Yes, ma'am.
There's a lot more to come, according to Trump. Yes. And I wanted your reaction to this too, because we have the nuclear, of course, tensions between the U.S. and Russia. We have the Ukraine conflict, which there are many terms still that have not been resolved. And then President Trump issued an executive order recently, where you're exactly right, Alastair. There hasn't been a statement of more sanctions on Russia, particularly, but in the secondary sanctions announcement, he called Russia to an unusual and extraordinary threat to the security and foreign policy of the United States. And it says, among other things, the importation from the U.S. of certain products of the Russian Federation, including oil, petroleum fuels, oils, and products of the distillation, will be targeted in these secondary sanctions. So how does this all factor into what often is this swinging back and forth between very cold, I feel like over the last several months, very cold talks between U.S. and Russia, not much happening, and then of late there's been more. So how does this all relate? Because it's mixed messaging.
Well, you'll have to parse it. I mean, on the face of it, it looks, very belligerent. But actually, what I think it relates to, but this is just my personal opinion, but what I think it relates to is that, in fact, the president, although he has many executive, if you like, abilities enshrined in the Constitution, that of tariffs and revenue raising is still, and constitutionally, lies with Congress. He is getting around this by invoking an emergency act, saying that the United States is in an emergency, and under the Emergency Act, that this is legitimizes his ability to impose sanctions and secondary sanctions on other people. So I think that is what we're seeing. It's partly a sort of attempt to bypass the legal problems that actually this is the preserve of Congress. Is supposed to issue tariffs, decide on tariffs. He has many other executive powers, but this one is with Congress. So I think that is probably explains what we're seeing. And these powers are wending their way through to the Supreme Court. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if it's not too long before the Supreme Court reasserts the right of Congress to have overall control over this aspect, i.e. revenue raising and tariffs, is there preserved under the Constitution. So we're going to see these come through. And so he's being, I think, very meticulous in saying there's an emergency and a threat to our nation by Russia. I mean, it's nonsense. There isn't a threat to the US from Russia. But I think it's all about finding a way around this legal problem before the, if you like, Supreme Court rules against him.
Some have surmised, Alastair, that Lindsey Graham is running the foreign policy show in many respects for the Trump administration. And his comments are very, especially on social media, but just in general, have been very instructive. He talks about how he completely understands and applauds Donald Trump's decision to hit India with the 25% tariff because India insists on purchasing Putin's oil to prop up the war machine, allowing the bloodbath in Ukraine to continue. And he's put the world on notice, Trump has, that if you continue to buy Putin's oil, you will no longer be able to have access to the American economy. Well done, Mr. President. You are the strong and decisive leader the world has been waiting for to end the Ukraine conflict. Does this have any impact on Russia, Alastair? Because if you listen to Lindsey Graham, he would convince you or attempt to convince you, if he's unconvincing, that it does.
It certainly does have an impact on Russia. And one of the aims of this meeting with Witkoff, which has just taken place, for the Russians was to understand actually what are the limits of power that are imposed on the president. It's quite clear that he is, to a certain extent, entrapped. The Epstein case, it shows no sign of lying down and dying. In fact, it's metastasizing all the time into something more extensive. And he is having problems with his MAGA supporters. It started off with the attack on Iran, which they didn't like because they felt, this is exactly what Trump said. He promised no more Middle East wars, no more, I'm not going to start any wars. I'm not going to do that. And then he attacked unprovokedly and in a surprise attacked Iran, if you like. Out of the blue, more or less. In fact, it was concerted to a certain extent with Iran, but it was out of the blue. And they were supposed to start negotiations on the following Sunday with Witkoff, who was already sort of preparing to go there for further talks. And then, bang, they were attacked. So what they're asking is, in effect, what Putin, and I'm putting it in much more boldly than Putin, who's very careful in his language, would say, but they are questioning who really is in charge of the United States. Is Trump in charge? Is he able to do things? Is he in charge in the sense that he has the capacity, he can say things and mean things and then do things? Otherwise, what's the point in the relationship? That's what a relationship is about. Both sides have to have confidence that the other side says things that they mean and that they're able to implement. And after all, at this stage, even in the baby steps that we had at the beginning, normalization of the relationship between states largely starts off by the simple things. You know, you have embassies and diplomats are posted to each other's states, and you have aircraft flowing between them. None of that has happened. Nothing. And so there are those in Russia who say, you know, well, is he serious? And if he's serious, why doesn't he do something? And I've said before, one of the things it would be so obvious to do is all the pressure coming from Europe to fire missiles to the extent of Russia, deeper and deeper into Russia. Well, that is based on a presidential finding by Biden that authorized the CIA to mount, if you like, missile attacks into the depth of Russia. Well, it wouldn't be very difficult for Trump to come up and say, well, yeah, there was this finding during the last administration, but who knows, it could have been signed by the auto pen. I don't even know that it's valid. So I've told the CIA to stop it. But it doesn't happen. So Russia looks and they think, you know, is he really able to come to an agreement? What is entrapping him? What is stopping him? And the first answer to that question is that the Senate is trying to stop him. I mean, these bills that are being put up, there's one just put up last week, they've put into a spending measure which was put into existing spending measures for a further $1 billion to go to Ukraine. Well, MAGA won't be happy with that at all. They won't like that. You know, you said no more money going to Ukraine on the campaign trail. And he can't really stop it because there is quite a strength of opinion in the Senate, particularly, and among some Republicans. And what we're talking about here, just to be very blunt, really, this is a struggle for, in the Republican Party, for control of the Republican Party and to wean away the MAGA support from Trump and to return, if you like, the Republican Party to being a unit party, as it was, the country club elite running the Republican Party, not the deplorables in the Rust Belt of America. So yes, how much is that? How much room does he have then to negotiate? How much latitude is there? That was what they were hoping to find out at this meeting.